You're listening to the GenWhy Leaders Podcast, Episode 6. Hey everyone, this is Eric Huey, host of the GenWhy Leaders Podcast, where we interview and learn from millennials who are leaders in their fields. These are individuals who have started their own businesses, have a high-ranking title within companies, or simply pursuing non-traditional means, such as their passion or hobby, to support themselves and their families. There still exists this negative stigma around our generation that we are entitled, lazy, and unreliable. So my goal is to prove that wrong, while also inspiring millennials to become the best versions of themselves and go after their big goals. Hey everyone, welcome back to another episode of the GenWhy Leaders Podcast. Hope everyone is doing well. Hey, got a couple quick questions for you right off the bat today. Do you like beer? Do you like stories of entrepreneurship? Do you like discussion of scaling business and business strategy? Well, I think if you answered yes to any one of those questions, you're going to love today's episode. Today we're going to talk to Chris Meyers, who is the co-founder of Crane Brewing, a local brewery here in Kansas City, who I feel like is growing by the minute and on more taps and in more stores every time I go out. But in this interview, Chris tells us about how he paired up with his co-founder, Michael Crane. We're going to talk everything from branding to obtaining investment capital to supply chain and, again, business scaling. So this interview is great for anyone who's interested in any one of those factors or simply interested in starting and growing a business. They say great businesses build brands and not just businesses, and I think that's something that Crane Brewing has definitely done, has built a brand. So here's my interview with Chris Meyers.
Who are you and what do you do?
I am Chris Meyers. I'm a KC native and co-owner of Crane Brewing Company.
We are a generation of purpose, so I was curious if there's any motivating factors that contribute to the success you had as far as starting Crane Brewing.
It's been a process, and it's been development, not just of the business, but of myself. I never thought growing up that I'd want to be a business owner. No interest in going to business school or taking those particular courses, but this was something that became a passion of mine pretty quickly as far as brewing goes, and visiting other breweries and realizing this is something I really wanted to do.
Yeah, that's great insight. And for the listeners, Chris and I went to high school together and had a great friendship, so it's cool to see him come this far and see what he's excelled at and what he's built with Crane Brewing. So I guess with that, give the listeners a brief overview of how Crane Brewing came to fruition, and that's really what I want to spend a lot of time on today, is as far as staying focused on a topic, because a lot of people listen to this are entrepreneurs or have success in mind in the workplace, whether they're inside a corporation or trying to start their own thing like you did. So that's really where I want to provide value to people listening, as far as giving them advice of how to do something similar to what you've done.
I usually tell people it was a mix of the right people coming together and the right pieces coming into alignment. It was a lot of like-minded ideas that we all realized we wanted to kind of create the same styles of beers. We wanted to do it together, and we could do a bigger project doing it together. But yeah, I mean, we a lot of it was just staying on target and focusing and fully committing to it. So we met every Sunday at one of our houses, and just every week was what's next, what do we need to do. I've got a lot of friends who are either own other businesses or getting into brewing specifically, and I'd like to do it someday, I'd like to get into it, and I think it's just initially that full mental switch of I'm going to do it, how quickly can I do it, what's it going to take to do it, and really committing to it. And a lot of that comes from career switching too. Most people in this industry come from some former life. Most people don't graduate from high school realizing, I want to get right into brewing.
Right.
And so a lot of people come from pretty lucrative careers, the different corporate environments, and they realize that, they can take something that they're passionate about, turn it into a business, and dedicate all their time to it.
What did life look like for you when you were trying to start the brewery up? You talk about people in this group having different occupations. You were doing something veterinary related. Is that correct?
Yeah, so I came from veterinary medicine. That was my first love and what I really got into, and was looking at finishing vet school. And about that time, we had our last kind of economic dip, and I had friends who had graduated before me who were working part-time at different hospitals, still $250,000, $300,000 in student loans, and it was kind of one of those things where the brewery was starting to take off, and I was young enough that I thought, if things didn't work out, I could go back to school and finish. And I wouldn't say it was the right time. Kimmy, my wife, was pregnant with our first kid, and she's like, now? Really? and I didn't know, when it's ever a good time to really kind of make a leap like this. So we did, like I said, when I mentioned the pieces coming together, it was us kind of committing to each other and doing a lot of events, a lot of charity events, a lot of beer festivals as homebrewers, making beer in the basement, gallons at a time, giving away hundreds of gallons, trying to get our name out, trying to build a brand. And that got us in touch with our first investors. It got us in touch with our first distributors. One thing we did that most breweries don't get to do is sign with a distributor before we even opened. And that really justified our business plan and kind of sealed the last bit of capital we needed. So that was about a year's worth of work to do that. And then about another year, actually building the brewery, getting licensing. And so we got together as a team late 2013. We brewed our first batch of beer September 2015.
Okay.
So relative, I think that's pretty quick, but we haven't stopped. We're just kind of, again, meeting on a regular basis, working together, kind of what's next.
Yeah. So talk about that distributor and investors component as far as tying in all these dream team components, if you will. It sounds like you're creating the Avengers of breweries or brewers. So I guess, how did you go about approaching distributors and investors, and how did those pieces come together?
The distributors was mostly just showing up at the same events. We were fortunate that we presented ourselves very professionally, and when we first started, there weren't as many breweries as there are now in KC, and so we were getting invited to a lot of professional brew fests as homebrewers, and that got us in touch with distributors who were there pouring for their brands. Investor-wise, we were mostly reaching out to people, friends of friends. We'd meet with an investor, and maybe it wasn't the right investment for them, but we'd follow up and be like, who do you know that it would be a good investment for? And it was a mix between also not just raising the money, but still retaining control, finding investors who would trust us to not only let us keep majority ownership, but also give us pretty much full vote. So we do have a good board of investors who've stuck by us and have relied on us to make the right choices.
Very nice. So when you're going to these investors, I imagine a lot of them have a lot of people approach them, a lot of different companies, whether they be brewers or not. You have to come with that value proposition and state how you're going to be different and how you're going to make their investment worthwhile. What exactly was your value proposition? What do those meetings look like when you went to them?
I think initially having the things in mind, so having the full plan that we had together. One of our partners is a CPA, and so he was able to help us really really put forward what he knew investors would want. Like I said, having a distribution contract before we even started brewing, knowing that there was a route of sale, not just in a tap room, because we did start kind of backwards. Most breweries nowadays open a tap room, kind of raise capital, get their name out, then maybe go into distro one day. We went into distro first and then opened a tap room. So for being a fairly new brewery, we're in 4, almost 5 states, but we've still got that on-premise location where people can come in and drink beer fresh from the source and meet us on a regular basis.
Yeah.
But I think, honestly, brewing is an interesting industry because it's manufacturing, it's event planning, it's running a bar essentially, and so there's kind of an interesting factor. So the right investor who's got the money and they want to put something in, there's a coolness factor.
Of course.
They at least know they're always going to get beer whenever they want it.
Yeah. What was the strategy behind the distribution first model?
It mostly came down to budget at the end. We had an idea of how much money we needed to operate to get started and what we wanted to do first, and we were going to need to cut some of our budget, and we realized initially that we always wanted to be mostly a production brewery. That was our end goal. So we ended up cutting the part of the budget to open the tap room from day one, as far as that construction goes and licensing and stuff. And we started distro, and a few months in we were able to start doing a temporary license with the city to run like a soft tap room, basically a soft opening, while we built out our final tap room. So a big thing is it's a mix. There's some things that you want to do. You want to put the right amount of money down. You want to do it the right way from day one. And there's some things that you can grow into. Mm-hmm. Make it work the way it needs to initially, and then build onto that.
Yeah. So as you're going through this process, was the Crane brand name, always a piece of that from the get-go, or at what point from, you said the first batch was in 2015, right?
Yeah.
So at what point did you know it was officially going to be Crane?
We had decided that pretty early on. We had looked at a couple different brewery names, a couple different logos as far as our branding works. And one of our partners, even though we all homebrewed, one of our partners did a lot more competitions, and he won a lot of medals. Not as related to the business side as we knew at the time, but he did have more of a name in the Casey area than we did because he did a lot of these competitions. And so we decided we wanted to go that route and name it after him. So that's my partner, Michael Crane.
Okay.
And ultimately we started getting the branding back and the logo. We had one that came back was an origami crane, and we loved that idea. We loved the idea, especially as we started packaging and bottling, that all of our labels could be pseudo origami. You know, they may not actually be traditional origami pieces, but it gives us a lot of flexibility to where all of our branding is consistent, but it still gives us freedom to kind of do whatever we want. If you can, have a concept in mind and just make it look like it's folded out of paper.
Yeah.
And so we've got origami, flowers and origami fruit, and we've got origami bikes. So.
Yeah, very cool. I've always enjoyed the branding, so appreciate a little bit of insight there to that.
Yeah, the other part of it was kind of tied into it was the origamis. The beers we do are very old recipes. And brewing's hands-on. It's kind of an art form. Origami, obviously very old traditional art form, but then also people would sit down and teach each other different ways of folding origami. Mm-hmm. It's a good icebreaker. Beer's a good icebreaker, and so that's kind of also how we tied it in.
Always good to have a story behind your brand and tie that in. Tell me about the first encounter with Michael Crane. How did you guys get to know each other, and then what that first conversation go like as far as when you knew, hey, this could be a good business partner?
Did not know him initially when I first started homebrewing, but when I decided I wanted to open a brewery, I started reaching out to anybody and everybody I could. So brewery owners, brewers, just finding contacts where I could, and kind of started to initially fall in love with the industry right then, because most industries you say, hey, I like what you do, I want to do it too, can you help me out? It's going to be, that's nice, but good luck figuring it out on your own. And everybody I met in the brewing world, even from day one, as just a homebrewer, was come down, let's have a beer, let's see what we can do to help you. And
that's awesome.
Along that way, saw an article of Michael. He was in the Kansas City Star as a homebrewer, again, winning all these medals. Not a big beer drinker, but he had a lot of friends that he could share beers with who could give him feedback on what he was brewing. And he happened to have a lot of recipes for similar styles that I liked brewing. And again, not knowing as much about the homebrewing medal side, that it wouldn't necessarily translate to professional brewing, but still that he had a lot of experience. I reached out to him and said, hey, I'd like to meet you. Let's hang out, brew someday. And so I went old school and I looked him up on White Pages.
Nice.
Knew he lived in Leawood, happened to find Michael Crane in Leawood. I think there were a few others. Called him up, said, basically found a new start. And so we met a few times and had brewed a few batches, and I told him that I wanted to open a brewery. At that time, he's like, well, that's nice. I've got a business. I'm not necessarily looking to do something new, but I'd like to help however I can, because he's passionate about beer too.
Yeah.
So we talked, had kind of moved a little bit down the road, had gotten in touch with who would eventually become our first head brewer, Steve Hood. We hired him from Boulevard. And
it's a good person to have on the team.
Yeah, and
Someone
that was
who's been there.
Known pretty early on that, even though we all enjoyed home brewing, we really wanted somebody who actually had worked in a production brewery, had a little bit more mindset on the troubleshooting and figuring things out and knowing how to work professional equipment. But he had come back to Michael and had showed him a building that I looked at. It was actually a building in downtown Lee Summit that I was wanting to put an offer on. And at that time, Michael's like, the business I have, it's not doing as well as it was. I think it may be shutting down. I'm about to have a 17,000 square foot building in Raytown. What do you think about, doing it together? And so we talked a little bit about that. And he had been brewing with another guy who was willing to go to brew school. So that's Randy Strange, our former head brewer, after Steve left. And he finished brew school while we were kind of finishing the planning things. And it was kind of, again, two teams. So it was myself and Aaron Bryant, who we went to school with, and Steve Hood, wanting to start a brewery, and Michael and Randy wanted to start a brewery. And again, us realizing that we wanted to do the same things. And it was just that last piece of the puzzle was adding Jason Lauk to kind of help us figure out the business plan and the financials and actually get the business part started. And it just kind of took off from there.
I guess diving a little more into the recipe component from what I remember, you guys really got to start in sour beers. Am I remember that correctly?
Yeah, we've always been really kind of passionate about sour ales, which is kind of a broad category. It's kind of like, do you like dark beers? Well, do you like stouts, like porters? Do you like Schwartz beer? But we knew that was something that we really loved, and there was a big void in the market at the time. So there's a lot of breweries that brew a lot of the styles that we do all over the country. Just no one was doing it in KC,
Right.
Year round with as much fruit and variants. And so that's quickly we became the sour brewery, which was nice, especially we're talking distributors, because that was a nice, something they could add to their catalog, their portfolio when they're selling to accounts. And it's something that I think we do really well. We do them a little bit differently than most breweries do, and it's still been something that we can kind of continue to grow and work on. But we've added more styles, so we're doing a lot more beers than that, but people still know us as a sour brewery.
Yeah.
I know when we first did our clean, just American porter, we go to accounts and we have a new beer, or like, oh, a new sour. Or like, no, it's a porter. Oh, a sour porter. Like, no, it's just a porter. But we've had the fun and knowing that people love the sour styles we do, especially.
Yeah, for the listeners, we're sitting here and enjoying the Raytown Common. It's I don't want to butcher anything by describing it, so I might let you do that, Chris. But yeah, Chris asked me if I wanted a beer when we got here. I was like, shoot, I can't I can't interview a brewer and not have a beer with them. So how would you describe this that we're drinking?
So the base is a California Common. Someone like, if anyone's familiar with like Anchor steam beer. It's got some Munich malt into it, which kind of stands out. It's a little bit sweeter, a little bit maltier, some nice graininess. But this was a mix. This was us wanting to have a lighter beer that everyone could kind of enjoy, not fruity, not hoppy, not sour. So a mix between friends kind of teasing us, saying you guys couldn't make a clean beer even if you wanted to. And also switching to Sixpacks. When we switched to Sixpacks, that was a huge model changer for us. And we knew one of those we wanted to have kind of a lighter, crisp beer. And so this is the one we even use the hashtag beer flavored beer. Yeah.
Very nice. Yeah, I'm glad I didn't try to take an attempt at describing that, because you knocked it out of the park as I knew you would. What's the clean beer comment? Is that just because you guys got your start in sour, so people were like giving you a hard time that you couldn't make a more traditional general type beer? Or?
I think so. I think there is a kind of a mindset between breweries that there's very big stretch, but it ultimately comes down to brewers, especially who can do really clean beers, especially lagers, and that's something we don't do a lot of, mostly because of production. Lagers can take a lot more time in just conditioning in tanks, and it's something that we need to turn beer over a lot quicker than that, so we don't really have the time to dedicate any of our tanks to doing lagers. But with those beers, usually the lighter the beer it is, it's harder to make because you don't have anything that you can hide behind. So
right.
if a beer has an off flavor, somebody might make a big IPA and they can hide it behind the hops, or a huge stout, or in our case sours. So there are a lot of brewers who don't necessarily have a lot of respect for breweries that do sours, because there's so much going on that they don't know if you can make a clean beer. And like I said, to clean, not that any of our beers are dirty, but that's kind of just denoting between beers that we use bacteria in and just traditional brewer's yeast. So any of our sours, that's mostly lactobacillus. We use some other strains, but it's just got a clean lactic lemony sourness. It's the same bacteria that's like in yogurt or sour cream.
Okay.
And that's a big part of our process, is we leave it live the whole time. Most breweries that do sours, at some point they pasteurize it or they boil it just because they're worried about it getting into the rest of their system. And we've not had that issue at all.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Very nice. So would you say that focusing on a unique part of the market as far as the sour beers when you got started, do you think that helped your initial growth get to that kind of middle tier level of people recognize you as a brand and as a brewery, to where then you could expand and people started trying some of these other ones like the Raytown Common, to where it just accelerated your growth?
I do. I think that has given us the trust and brand recognition and faith that we've been able to put our beers in the market and kind of spread, and then it does give us the ability to then kind of do some other beers on the side that we really want to do.
Yeah, very nice.
Yeah.
You mentioned Sixpacks a little bit ago and get into that. So before, when you guys got your start, you were doing what they call the bombers. Is that correct?
They're 750, so wine bottles essentially.
Okay.
And that was our start because we didn't start with a full production line, a packaging line. And so it would take 8 to 10 people pulling bottles off a pallet, labeling, date coding, sanitizing, purging with CO2, filling with beer, capping, putting back in a box. And now we can run it in about 2.5 guys on our bottling line. And it was, again, kind of going back into the brewery and saying, we know we want to sell more beer. We know we want more distribution. Do we want to keep doing the 750s and just go outside of our market and go wider and just buy more fermenters, just make more beer that way? Or do we want to go into Sixpacks and bite the bullet and buy a bottling line and give the people in our home market what we know they really want? And so for most people in Kansas City, you're wanting a 6-pack, a usual 12-ounce size package. Not everyone is as comfortable with a beer and a wine bottle size. And so that has totally, changed the way that we produce beer and we sell beer and the kind of beers that we want to make.
Would you say that the 6-pack, as far as sales and what you're seeing people buying now, would you say the 6-packs and cans are more dominant compared to the bombers now?
Much bigger, yeah. And cans, I think, are that much more. That's something we want to add eventually as a canning line, especially being in Missouri in the Midwest, just for the sake of anywhere you can't take glass. So
right.
Float trips, camping, golf, tailgating. And so that is something we're looking at, but our volume of sales went way up just by going to a smaller package and being able to do 6-packs. But then at that point, it is a volume game because we can't price point it the same as we were per ounce as the 750. Our margins were definitely in the 750, but we're looking at that turnover being a lot higher.
Yeah. So is canning more expensive than bottling, or how come you guys haven't jumped into that avenue yet?
The initial reason was because we still do a lot of Brett beers and a lot of barrel-aged beers and certain styles, and until we kind of perfected our process, even our sour beers, we didn't know if we really wanted to put in a can. Now we're a lot more confident about the way that we package them. And so the bottling line we got had the ability to do any size bottle. Most bottling lines you get are made to bottle a certain size bottle, a certain volume, and a certain shape. And so this one we got lets us do any size bottle, 12 ounce to 750. And the manufacturers of it also had the ability, we're working on a canning adaptation to it, to where it would normally come down and cap a bottle, it would come down and seam a can.
Nice.
And unfortunately they went out of business before they could finish that prototype. So we bought the bottom line with the anticipation of buying that canning adaptation so we could do both on the same machine, which anyone listening to this from the brewing industry, it's insane as it sounds.
Yeah.
So we didn't know for sure if it would happen. But so now it's looking like to do canning, it would mean a whole other canning line basically. So we're just waiting to put the capital into that.
Yeah, speaking of capital, I'm interested, a lot of people on this podcast are also interested being in kind of an entrepreneurial type spirit as far as how to scale a business. So you've talked at a high level about that, but I mean, you've started with the bombers or the 750 milliliters, and then you also added more fermentation tanks not too long ago, right? Like just about a year ago or something like that. And then also I just recently saw an article in the Kansas City Business Journal where a barbecue restaurant's coming in and going to be in the tasting room. Is that correct? Awesome. So how do you, I guess, justify those steps up?
Mostly relate to them as phases. Yeah, we have always tried to be able to pay for things as we go, and like I said, run things really thin at times just to pay bills and until we can kind of get to that step. Just because we're not really in the mindset to really want to borrow any more money at this point, just because we already have investors to pay off. And this is the first time, because we're getting ready to expand and add some more things to the brewery, that we are looking at adding some more investors and opening up some of our percentages to be able to do that. But yeah, to me it's just part of almost being just terrified. The brewing industry has changed a lot. We were one of a few breweries in KC a few years ago when we started. Now we're going to have over 40 just in KC, over $7,000 in the whole country.
Wow.
So way more breweries than we've ever had even before Prohibition.
Right.
And so there's a lot of breweries that are going to find some struggles. It's a lot of, finding your niche, finding what you're good at, finding something that you can kind of specialize in, getting local support, just because as more breweries distribute, I think in more markets, more beer consumers are getting into drinking local. They're realizing, oh, why would I buy an IPA, several states over when I can get something fresh that's made right around the corner for me?
Yeah, and support a local business.
Yeah, and I've just seen a few breweries and even friends of mine who did giant expansions, millions of dollars, and didn't turn that into more production and sales right away, and so they've had to close.
Wow.
And so, yeah, we haven't really kind of wanted to go that route yet.
Yeah, cautiously step ahead.
You got it. So little by little. So like I said, we started with our initial setup, then we added the tap room, so that was some capital we had to put into that to build that out. Buying the tanks, buying the bottling line. Some things we're talking about in the future is adding an expanded beer garden. So that could be, not just more comfortable outdoor seating like a patio. It could be, something for dogs. It could be something, live entertainment outside. We're also looking at like adding the kitchen. So we're not food guys as far as being in the restaurant industry. A lot of experience, like we all enjoy cooking, but that's something that we don't have a lot of experience in. So we knew we didn't want to start with a kitchen. We didn't want to be a brew pub from day one. So we always like the idea of partnering with somebody else and letting them kind of manage that side of things and make it mutually beneficial for both of us. And so that's Tyler Hart Barbecue is who we're working with, and it's a little bit of process to get zoned and to build out the kitchen. So it could be a few months before he's fully open, but every Saturday he's out there, he sells out. It legitimately some of the best barbecue I've ever had. And he's just like us as far as being like-minded. If somebody said, hey, I want to do barbecue there, I'd be like, well, we have a lot of barbecue in KC. I don't know how I feel about that. But even before trying his barbecue, just hearing him talk, he's super passionate. He loves what he does. The events we've done with him, he's there overnight, smoking all night long. He uses real wood.
Wow.
He's one that, he makes a barbecue sauce, but he thinks his barbecue is good enough that it doesn't need sauce, and I agree with that. And he's doing really unique stuff. His coleslaw is unique. He does barbecue tacos with these like duck fat fried tortillas that are amazing.
You're making me hungry.
Yeah, it's so dang good, and having food there on a regular basis, that's something in the tap room that our slowest points are when it hits lunch and dinner time, because people got to eat, and so they'll go eat, and then we fill back up again. But really also anticipating what's going to happen with the bike trail. So the Jackson County bought the Rock Island expansion corridor, which happens to connect within a few trails to the Katy Trail. Mm-hmm. So someone within reason could go all the way from St. Louis to KC when it's finished. They finished the section between Pleasant Hill and Lee Summit, and then the next phase is from Lee Summit through our parking lot, through Arrowhead, and then we'll connect downtown.
That's amazing.
And yeah, the Katy Trail is one of the busiest bike trails in the whole country. People come from all over to ride that, and I think they'll do that much more, knowing they can go from one metro of like St. Louis all the way to Kansas City. And we're really the only, in this part of town, in the KC side, we're really one of the only venues like it on the actual trail.
Right. And
so again, having a food place where people can stop, not just beer, maybe adding some more amenities down the road, but that's something we're really looking forward to.
Yeah. So did you have any idea when you had this, or when you got this space, or when you moved in with Michael to this building that you made your brewery, did you have any idea that bike trail was going to go in front there?
We had been told something like it was going to happen, but most people told us about it said it's either going to be 10 to 15 years down the road, or it's never going to happen. So we didn't really bank on it. It's just been really pleasant surprise that it's kind of everything has slowly actually come to fruition in the last year.
Yeah, that sounds like it's all coming together for sure. That's awesome that you'll have so many additional entertainment lines in the water, so to speak, as far as getting people into your brewery and keeping them there now with food as well. So a big part of scaling a business and having it grow and getting a fan following is marketing. And I'm a marketing guy, so I'm probably a little biased in this interview. I'm curious to know maybe what your strategy is behind marketing, and also what has been the most beneficial for you. Do you feel like word of mouth has been the best? It seems to be the best in other areas, but I'm curious if it's public relations, or do you feel like your social media following is really passionate and behind you? What's going on?
We are, for the most part, still a small business, and so we really don't have the ability to put a lot of money into advertising. But we've considered looking into radio, like all the usual radio, billboards, not necessarily TV, but trying to figure out how we can get our message out there. Social media is still a huge part of that. Just everyone's connected. It's gotten a little bit tougher, just the way the algorithms have changed. And I'm not a social media expert at all, but I know the way Facebook has changed even the last couple of years. The content they show you and how you want to get the stuff out there. A lot of it is just PR and word of mouth and working with people that we like. we do a ton of charity things. So whether it's something as simple as putting together like an auction basket for somebody's event, or and depending on the organization, we're not always able to write checks to anyone, again being a small business, but we always have beer. So if there's something we can partner on to have beer at a facility to help somebody out, we do that quite a bit. And things like this, like we've been really fortunate that there have been journalists and radio personnel and people like you doing productions like this. Like we jump all over that because that's the best way we can kind of get our name out.
How do you go about engaging a distributor? Do they just take a percentage of their sales that they get from whatever retailers they engage, or how does that work?
For the most part, and especially the partnerships we have, it's essentially a markup system. So we sell to our distributors for a certain price. They then sell to a retailer for a certain price, and the retail marks it up again to the customer. So, like I said, it's definitely a volume matter. We make our best margins in the tap room because we're able to sell it directly to customers.
Right.
But there's no way we'd be able to sell that much volume just out of our tap room. So we work with our distributors to get it on the market. And so essentially we sell our beer for a third of the price is what we could sell it directly. Mm-hmm. But again, knowing that we're not having to deal with logistics and salespeople and stocking shelves and all that. So we really rely on our distributors and our on and off premise accounts to help us sell our beer and work with them. It's really just making sure they have what they need, having a clear understanding of what we're going to make and how much they want to move, and working together on what's right for the market and the right style of beers. Yeah.
So as the total number of breweries have increased, have the total number of distributors also increased, or do you feel like there's a finite amount of distributors kind of dominating the market, so to speak, distributing for all these microbreweries?
I think there are more distributors. I don't think it's proportionate growth, but there are some more distributors, and there's some that can afford to really choose how they want to focus, what kind of distribution they want to do. So the old model was that a lot of distributors used to be what they considered a Bud house or a Miller Coors house. They always had like one big macro brand that was the real moneymaker, but then they could also sell some craft on the side. And that market switched so much that craft is really, the sales of craft is going higher and higher every year. That you've got distributors who are opening up who are craft only. They don't want anything to do with any large macro breweries. And so it's nice in our markets, at least the states we're in, because we don't self-distribute, in dealing with other breweries, and so being able to have that camaraderie on one side and not having to be directly, dealing with shelf space or tap handles or anything like that, because we sold the beer to distributors. They now own it. It's their, they're dealing with that, and so that does kind of let us take a step aside, so we don't have to necessarily feel competitive, because everyone assumes, they're surprised by how well we get along with other breweries. That's your direct competition. And
right.
Any other business, you're right, it should be. But for us, it's mostly, how can we get people into drinking local craft beer and not drinking the bigger brands. So I guess you could say it's us little dogs versus the bigger ones still. Mm-hmm. And so that's how we can still make it work.
Appreciate you walking us through kind of the start to finish of how your business has grown. So I guess to slowly wrap it up here, a lot of people have a desire to do something you've done as far as build a business that one day needs investors and continue to grow it and put your passion and hours and hours of work behind it. So I guess what advice would you have to someone who's at that beginning stage that you were when you were just doing some of the home brewing?
I would say, like I said, I think you have to make a commitment to yourself and even make a commitment to other people and have people hold you accountable that, if you want to do it, you're going to do it. And I think a big part also is just don't feel strange. Asking for help and asking people for advice. I think I had a lot of people initially, I'd want to ask somebody a question about how they did something. They're like, I can't believe you just asked them. And like, the worst they can say is no.
I love that.
And so learning and kind of not just learning from other people, but figuring exactly what you want to do.
Were there any books or resources along the way, or perhaps that you continue to reference, that you feel like have helped you in your journey, or is it more so just learn by doing, act, assess, and then adjust?
There's some good books I read brewing specific. I wouldn't say necessarily business wise, because like I said, even though obviously we've got a business and we're working together on it, I still don't consider myself super business minded. It has been stuff I learned along the way. My first experience of that was when I was still doing veterinary stuff, and a position, I was 19 years old, a position to be a practice manager came up, and again, no interest in really running the business side of things, but I knew in vet school there's not really a lot of time for business school, and most vets do eventually want to own their own practice, so this is the best way I'm going to learn. And so I jumped on that, and that's where kind of, just basic stuff of dealing with inventory and dealing with employees and labor, but also kind of figuring what you need to do to hit those goals. That really started me off on a good foot to then kind of turn that into a totally different industry as far as brewing goes.
Awesome, Chris. Well, I greatly appreciate your time. The last thing I usually ask guests on the show is, where can people best get a hold of you if you feel comfortable giving it away, just for people to contact you about general business advice, or maybe even as specific as what beers pair good with what food?
Awesome. Yeah, I am always happy to help other people. I'll get back to you as soon as I can, but it's really easy. It's just Chris, CHRIS, at cranebrewing.com.
Awesome. And that's CRANE brewing.com. Chris, greatly appreciate your time. He's so busy that he hadn't ate dinner yet, so I'm going to let him go. Chris, thanks so much.
Thank you.
That wraps up today's episode. I want to thank you all again for listening. My name is Eric Huey, and my goal is to provide you with inspiring content that helps you do your job better or go after your big goals. I'd appreciate your feedback with a rating or review on whichever platform you found the show. And if you'd like to share your feedback directly, or if you know someone who would be a great guest on the show, feel free to email me directly at GenWhyLeaders@gmail.com. That's GenWhyLeaders@gmail.com. Thanks again. I'll see you next time.